Okay, now let's move on to files and directories on our operating system. It is very convenient to be able to manipulate files and directories from Python. Python has a number of great facilities for doing this. The first one we'll look at is listdir. Listdir is part of the OS module. OS module, similar to the sys module, allows us to communicate with the operating system, but OS functions are more attuned towards things you might do yourself at the command line, like when we use the ls command or the dir command to list out files. Here we're using os.listdir in a looping situation in order to look at the file names in a particular directory. Now the searchdir we're using is called dot. Dot is actually a shorthand for the current directory. So we would have a choice to mention the current directory using a string if we wished. I think the directory we're in right now is users David PyCharm projects ipycontent 8. That happens to be the directory that I'm in, and we should see the same thing whether we run it this way or use the dot. Why don't I run this program, see what we get. So I'm seeing a file listing, which as you can see is very similar to the file listing that's shown in this project directory. This happens to be the directory that I'm in. We can be listing out any directory we wish. You see two other files here, dsstore and .dsstore and .idea. These are going to be Unix, or rather, these are actually Mac-specific directories that are generated by the Mac operating system and are used to help manage all the files and directories on the Mac operating system. But as I mentioned, I can also use a special shortcut to this directory or the current directory, and that is the dot. You can see I'm getting the same result here. Now, looking at OS listdir, you can see that either listdir presents us with an object that we can loop over, or it's just giving us a list. And of course, we can find that out easily enough just by looking at it. As you can see, it is a list of strings, just like other lists of strings that we've seen. Listdir delivers a list of strings, and each string is a file name in the directory that we're listing. So this is pretty straightforward. We're getting a listing of any directory we wish. We could use, let's say, the Unix home directory. The Unix root directory, which is called /. We could use the Windows root directory, which is called // if we wish. Of course, that's not going to work for me here, but it would work in Windows. And by the way, there's something that I didn't mention that we really do need to talk about when it comes to directories in Windows. We haven't used any paths yet. But we are about to actually start using paths within Windows. And when you do use paths within Windows, you're going to want to use an R in front of your string. Now you can do this whether you're in Windows or Unix. It doesn't really make a difference. In fact, it's probably a good rule of thumb just to use an R in front of your quotes when you're working with directory paths. And I'll explain why. There are many directories, the directories within Windows are notated with backslashes. Now, of course, in Unix, it's different. In Unix, if I wanted to, let's say, have some sort of complete path, I might say, let's say, my home directory users David. Look closely at the difference between line 7, which is a Windows path, and line 8, which is a Unix or Mac path. And by the way, I haven't really mentioned this, but you may know that the Mac is built on top of the Unix operating system, which means that when we're at the command line, we're actually talking to Unix. You can see that the path for Unix or Mac is /. The / divides those directories. And in Windows, it's the \. Okay, now look closely at the coloring with \n and \r. What does that remind you of? Well, you may not have seen \r before. It's another character like new line character, but the \n should be familiar to you. It is the new line character. So what's unfortunate about using a Windows path inside a regular string is that customarily Python will interpret the \n as a new line character. Now, if you happen to have a directory name that starts with n, it's not going to be useful to you to use \n in a string because Python's going to interpret that \n as a new line character. There are a couple of solutions for this. One of them is to just double / your directories. That's something you can do as well. But a simpler way is just to use the R in front of any of your strings. The R in front of any of your strings means raw string. And what that means is that Python will not try to interpret the \n as a new line character. It'll allow each character to stand alone by itself. So I think it's useful whether you're using Windows or Unix to start using the R in front of any strings that you use in which you're trying to notate directory paths. Of course, in Unix, it doesn't make a difference, but it's not going to hurt. So it could be just a really good habit to start to use. In any case, it's only necessary in Windows, and you'll want to use it anytime you're using any paths involving \. That's the reason we're doing this here. I'm going to use it customarily just for Unix, just to keep that reinforced. Now here, as I mentioned before, I'm listing out all of the files. This is in my home directory. There's quite a few files in there. Of course, I normally am not interested in a list of them. Normally, I'm interested in what's in my directory item by item. So I'm probably going to usually just use the for looping in order to get there. And there we have our file listing. Now, very important, when we want to refer to files that are in this directory, we're going to run into a very particular problem, which I will talk about in the next video.